I'm Alma Langlois, and today we honor a fallen drive-in icon, the world karate champion for 6 consecutive years, one of Canon's most popular stars, a Total Gym spokesman, best-selling author, and a comedy meme. We lost Chuck Norris in March, a little over a week after his 86th birthday, and today I'm talking about my favorite of his films, 1983's Lone Wolf McQuade. Chuck stars as Texas Ranger J.J. Lone Wolf McQuade. With the assistance of rookie state policeman K.O., he does battle with a ruthless drug cartel who are now stealing and smuggling military arms. His primary nemesis is the Argyle 11 karate enthusiast Raleigh Wilkes. Not only will he do battle with Raleigh for the safety of El Paso, but for the hand of the tough and sexy widow played by gorgeous Barbara Carrera. Directed by Steve Carver. Born in Brooklyn, he started out more interested in being a cartoonist and commercial art. While obtaining his MFA at Washington University in St. Louis, he worked as a cameraman for Wide World of Sports and the St. Louis Cardinals, and then ventured into documentary filmmaking. His documentaries he made as a grad student led to his admission at the American Film Institute, where he mentored both the likes of George Stevens, Gregory Peck, George Seaton, and Charlton Heston. When Alfred Hitchcock guest lectured at the Institute, Carver cornered him in the library and got the master of suspense to teach him how to storyboard. Carver also befriended one of my all-time favorite filmmakers, Sam Peckinpah, through one of his mentors. His 35mm short film adaptation of The Telltale Heart caught the attention of Roger Corman, who offered Carver the opportunity to come work for him. Carver started out cutting trailers for New World Pictures and wrote a number of unproduced scripts. He said Roger taught him something he hadn't learned at AFI: practical filmmaking. Carver was also editing movies that came out of the Philippines and South America, and Roger showed him what the directors he was working with were doing wrong or doing right. Then Roger gave him his first chance to step into the director's chair with The Arena. Pleased with the picture, Corman next assigned Carver to direct Big Bad Mama, where his second unit director was none other than a young Paul Bartel. Bartel said Carver was very well organized and described him as having great control of the medium. With the box office success of that picture, Corman had Carver direct another gangster picture for 20th Century Fox, Capone. Carver enjoyed working with John Cassavetes and Sylvester Stallone, but said Ben Gazzara was a real pain in the ass. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times after the release of the picture, Carver said, "All I want to do for now is a string of good commercial pictures, but in my own style." The interviewer described Carver as intense and dynamic as his films, an aggressive achiever who has already accomplished enough for 3 people. Next, he replaced Burt Kennedy as director on the Great Mandingo sequel, Drum, for Dino De Laurentiis. That was an ordeal. I tell you more about it, but with my Warren Oates obsession, you know I gotta do a drum show at some point, so stay tuned. So let's go ahead and skip ahead. In 1979, Carver directed his last film for Corman, the little scene western comedy Fast Charlie the Moonbeam Rider. This is important in Carver's career, as this was the first time he worked with David Carradine, L.Q. Jones, and R.G. Armstrong, who of course all appear in Lone Wolf McQuade. Carver said, "This was something I learned from Sam Peckinpah. Sam taught me that if you work with character actors that you can rely on, they will hold up a picture. They're basically the foundation of the picture. They make it credible. When you're working with a difficult lead actor, you want to rely on the character actors to stabilize the picture. You have them there, they know what you want, and they do it. I always hire them. I always love them. Always smiling, always nice. They get into character, and when you call cut, they get out of character. The method actors never get out of character. They're always in character. Always a pain in the ass. They're difficult."
Actresses. I hate them. You're cattle. You put me behind schedule. You ruin my atmosphere. You drive me crazy. But my films will outlive all of you.
Carver had a good relationship with Frank Capra Jr., who suggested he work with Chuck Norris in 1981's An Eye for an Eye. Carver said, "Chuck was a nice guy. The first thing he said to me when we met was that he wanted to be like John Wayne."
I want to be a personality on the screen, a guy who projects a certain image that everyone would enjoy seeing, you know, in entertaining type films. And in fact, I went to my sons, I said, "Who is it on the screen that you look up to?" And they couldn't mention anybody. And I said, "You know, that's really a shame, because I grew up with certain heroes on the screen, with, like you said, John Wayne and Gary Cooper, and there's people that I could emulate, and they stood for something very positive and something very real. And today there aren't that many on the screen that you can say, gee, I wouldn't mind my son being like that. And it's really a shame, because I think we need more positive type screen heroes that kids can look up to and identify with. If they don't identify with something positive, they're going to identify with something negative.
Carver got close to Chuck and Chuck's family during shooting. He really enjoyed that relationship and vowed to work with Chuck again. Carver was friends with the screenwriter H.K. Dial, who then introduced Carver to his writing partner B.J. Nelson. They were working on a script inspired by the real-life Texas Ranger Lone Wolf Gonzalez. If you're interested in learning more about him, I got a link down below, so check it out. Anyway, upon reading the script, the first thought that came to Carver's mind was, Chuck! And he approached him to do the picture. Carver said, but when I did Lone Wolf with him, I said to Chuck, this character is really seedy. You gotta get more gruff and dirty. You gotta drink beer. You gotta have a beard. His first reaction was, what about the kids? What are the kids gonna say? And I said, the kids will love you. Don't worry about it. He was very against drinking beer on screen and being dirty. I said, but you're a Texas Ranger, a lone wolf. I said, John Wayne was dirty in some of his pictures. Come on now. We finally got him to accept. Of course, the beard he grew for the role of J.J. McQuade became one of his trademarks. Quick sidebar. Lone Wolf Gonzalez also inspired the protagonist played by Nick Nolte in Extreme Prejudice. Those two movies would make a great double feature, and both bear the creative stamp of John Milius. Carver said Milius was a good friend of his, as they were both shooting buddies and both belonged to the NRA. He wanted his help with a rewrite of the script because, in addition to his writing talent, Milius was also very knowledgeable about guns. By the time Milius was involved, Orion had picked up the script, and Carver said Orion really didn't like the opening scene in the original script because it was just more of a typical action movie opening where Lone Wolf McQuade kills a wanted man. Milius rewrote the scene as a Western and showed off Chuck as an invincible, ballsy Texas Ranger. Carver said Milius didn't want credit for complicated reasons, but it was a fun collaboration, and John Milius' name does appear in the closing credits as spiritual advisor. Carver again enjoyed working with Chuck. He explained most athletes are so systematically trained that they approach acting in the same manner, and that gives them a stiffness or a wooden quality on screen. He said he worked with Chuck to relax him, and then that helped let his emotions shine through in his performance. Carver said he was fascinating to work with on Lone Wolf McQuade because he had matured as an actor. Carver recalled, Chuck was a little bit stiff in An Eye for an Eye. He became looser in Lone Wolf McQuade. After that, he became a better actor with every picture he did. Critics have been pretty harsh regarding Chuck's acting prowess.
Hated it!
And Chuck himself has always been self-deprecating about his own skill as an actor. He usually ranges from earnestly wooden to ass-kicking stoic. But let's be honest, we're not here to see Chuck be Laurence Olivier. We're here to see Chuck kick guys in the face. And in my 2 cents, I agree with Carver that Chuck got better as an actor, and Lone Wolf McQuade is one of his best performances, I think because the role really fits Chuck like a glove, and it emphasizes his screen presence and the things that he's really good at.
I'm a cowboy at heart, and when the Lone Wolf McQuade script came around, I was, even though it's a contemporary movie, it still dealt with the basic cowboy, a guy who is like a last of a breed. I mean, McQuade would fit in very well in the 1880s as well as the 1980s, and he will do anything in order to accomplish what he goes after. And he becomes very famous, a very famous Texas Ranger. Even though sometimes he will bend the law a little bit, he will never break it. But he's the type of guy who gets obsessed about accomplishing whatever it is he does. The only thing he fails in is his marriage. But the reason why he does is that his wife, Molly, is so deeply in love with him that she can't handle the anguish of wondering, is he going to come home or not? And because of her deep love for him, she can't handle that, so they split. But yet there's still a relationship between them as friends.
Chuck Norris was born Carlos Ray Norris in Ryan, Oklahoma, just across the Red River from Texas. His father worked as a mechanic and a truck driver. and was unfortunately also an alcoholic who worked intermittently and would go on drinking binges that lasted months at the time, leaving Chuck's mother Wilma to support the children on her own. He described his father's absences as happier times because at least there was none of the tension in the house and the anxiety that comes with living with someone who could blow up at any minute. Norris said he was embarrassed to bring any friends home because he didn't know if his father would come home drunk or how he would act. By the time Chuck was 10, his family had moved 16 times. From his childhood to his teens, he and his family had lived in Oklahoma, Kansas, Arizona, and finally Torrance, California. Norris said, moving like that, you never establish relationships as a kid that help you grow. As a young man, he was painfully shy, withdrawn, non-athletic, and an average student who almost dropped out of high school. Being as poor as we were on welfare with my mom working, I had to take on certain responsibilities, like taking care of my brothers, he said. That made me grow up sooner than other kids my age. I was head of the household, but of course, I missed my father's attention and affection. The biggest problem I had was poor self-image, which was probably the main cause of my shyness. I was always afraid of saying the wrong thing, so I wouldn't speak up much.
The last time we talked to you, and I think you mentioned here that your father, who was Cherokee, abandoned you. And what I read was a scene that sounded almost too dramatic to be in real life, that he returned at some point in your life to beat up the man your mother had, her current husband.
Yeah.
Is this...
Well, what had happened is my mother, divorced my real father and remarried a real nice fellow. My stepfather's just a tremendous guy. Yeah. And my dad showed up, when I was 17. And he was threatening. He was threatening to beat up my stepfather, who was a small fellow. And first time in my life, I faced off my real father. And my dad's a big man, and had a bad temper, and tough. And but once we squared off, my real father realized this wasn't the way to go, and he left. That was the last time I ever saw him, as a matter of fact.
He lamented not having the guidance from a father that a son needs, but he credited his not going off on a bad path to his mother's influence, a strong Irish woman with steadfast morals. He said she instilled in him his optimism and his resilience in overcoming obstacles. When he was 16, his mother divorced his father after he came home drunk and hit her. She later remarried Chuck's stepfather, who Chuck described as a wonderful man. In 1958, Chuck Norris joined the Air Force as an air policeman, stationed in South Korea, where he opted to learn martial arts. He recalled, "I stuck to it, earned a black belt ranking, and that was the first time I'd ever accomplished something difficult on my own." It took about 6 months, but as I became more and more proficient, many of the psychological insecurities started to subside. I was becoming more communicative and assertive, and I had better self-image. My attitude towards others began to change. Discharged in 1962, he returned to Torrance and applied to be a police officer. But most importantly, he opened up a martial arts studio and began competing in tournaments. He spent the late 60s and early 70s teaching karate, competing in martial arts competitions, and opening karate schools. But by the mid-70s, financial problems threatened to close the schools. Around the same time, Chuck felt he had already won nearly every major title possible and decided to retire from competition. He began to dabble in acting, with a minor role in The Wrecking Crew, before playing Bruce Lee's nemesis in 1972's Way of the Dragon, which was an international box office hit. He also had a role in Jonathan Kaplan's Student Teachers. It was none other than Steve McQuade, his martial arts student and friend, who encouraged Chuck to take acting classes at MGM. Norris recalled, "I jumped into films when I was in my mid-30s. I had no experience. I'd never even done a high school play. If I looked at it in a negative way, I would have given up. But from training myself over the years to think positively and to realize that if there was a will, there was a way, I was able to achieve success. And by thinking if I could project a certain image on the screen, maybe that would overcome my inability as an actor at this point in time." Influenced by his own experiences, in 1990 he established his own philanthropic organization, Kickstart Kids.
I don't see you somehow as part of the Hollywood scene. Would you tend to be invited to Irving Lazar's Oscar party, that kind of thing? Or?
I get invited to various Hollywood parties and Oscar parties and so forth. Mm-hmm. I'm a member of the Academy.
Yeah.
But
I guess I don't see you hanging out in the social scene that much.
I really don't. I have a ranch in Texas, and that's really where I spend most of my time when I'm not working. And plus I have a Kick Drugs Foundation in Houston. I spend a lot of time with my foundation. So
does that have a full title, Kick Drugs Out of America or
Kick Drugs Out of America Foundation is the actual title, which means that I work with inner city kids in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade levels, and we teach the martial arts as part of the physical education curriculum in these particular schools. I have 680 kids in my program, and these are, as a karate teacher for years, I taught a lot of kids, and I saw what the martial arts could do for them. I had kids in my classes who couldn't communicate with kids their age, or low self-esteem, over-aggressive kids, whatever the case may be. And through the martial arts, we were able to help many of these kids, most of them. But these were kids whose parents could afford to come to my school. How about the millions of kids that couldn't afford it?
Yeah.
So that's what this program is helping work with these kids whose parents can't afford the program.
How do you select them? Because there must be an awful lot more that want to come in than you can handle.
Oh gosh, yeah. Each school, each school that we're teaching at, of course, the average is about 800 kids. We can only handle 150 per school. And so the teachers and the principal picks the kids. And it's all voluntary. They have to have their parents' permission. And what we found out is that out of all the kids in the school, that 90% of them want to be in our program. And that's the hard part, is picking the right, the 150 out of, say, 600, 650 kids to be in the program. That's the hardest part of the whole thing. What's happening, of course, is, in the martial arts, you instill discipline and respect. And what is happening with these kids that we're teaching, you see that carrying over into their other classes, their English, math, history classes. Now they're responding to their teachers as yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, rather than yeah, no, and all this stuff here. Yeah. So it's carrying over.
In 1978, he starred in what he considered his first significant lead role, Good Guys Wear Black. No studio wanted to release it, so Chuck and the producers four-walled the film, renting theaters and taking whatever money came in. The film was a hit, as was its follow-up, A Force of One. Martial arts films have been popular with American audiences, but unlike previous stars like Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris was a successful homegrown American star, and his films had distinctly American settings and themes. Lone Wolf McQuade was shot on location in El Paso, Texas. Carver said, "El Paso is filled with locations that are not only visually exciting, but also authentic. The scenes that were filmed at Indian Cliffs are some of the most spectacular in the film." Carver thought the Texas Film Commission was very helpful, and producer Yoram Bonamy was effusive about filming in Texas, declaring it a friendly state with friendly people, and recommended anyone looking to shoot a film on a budget to go to Texas. Many have noted that Lone Wolf McQuade has a great spaghetti western feel and a terrific Ennio Morricone-style score by Francesco De Masi. Carver said he studied the great Sergio Leone's visual techniques to emulate in the film, even down to the opening credits, which Carver designed himself. Quick sidebar: the wolf in the film's opening credits belonged to Tippi Hedren. I can also see the influence of Carver's mentor Peckinpah, but the color scheme of the film really reminds me of his roots with Corman, with its bright lighting and lots of warm, saturated colors. Lone Wolf McQuade is well directed, fun, and briskly paced. That 1 hour, 45-minute running time just flies by. I love all the colorful, well-crafted characters who really live and breathe more than they would in a standard action movie. And it helps that they're played by a fantastic cast. Robert Beltran, David Carradine, the fabulous Barbara Carrera, Sharon Farrell rocking an unfortunate 80s haircut.
Now, don't get yourself all worked up. I'm an independent woman now, and I've got my own life to live.
Leon Isaac Kennedy, Peckinpah regulars L.Q. Jones and R.G. Armstrong, love those guys. And one of my favorites, William Sanderson. Sanderson did his own stunt in this scene. He and Chuck Norris got along great, and in fact, Chuck made sure a part was written for Sanderson in his next film, but unfortunately Sanderson had a conflict and he couldn't do it. But Chuck did make sure Mr. Sanderson made 3 appearances on Walker, Texas Ranger. "I know a lot of people slam Norris and knock his movies," Sanderson said, "but he's been incredibly good to me and a great gentleman." And there's a bit of a Friday the 13th connection with Lone Wolf McQuade, with Part 3's Dana Kimmell as McQuade's daughter, and since Steve Carver cast all of the film's stuntmen as members of the drug cartel, we also get Kane Hodder. David Carradine's a terrific bad guy. He's always got a subdued cockiness and a twinkle in his eye, and I love the way he twists his neck like a cobra, ready to strike in the climactic fight scene. There's gossip that Carradine and Norris got into a real physical fight filming their fight scene, but Chuck has said in multiple interviews that the problem was that Carradine, because of his starring role on Kung Fu, really overestimated his own skills as a martial artist. He didn't have the control he thought he did, which resulted in Chuck and at least 2 stuntmen getting hurt. Norris said he thought Carradine was a good actor and he would work with him again, although he did quip, "David Carradine is about as good a martial artist as I am an actor." On the other hand, he was effusive about working with Robert Beltran, who's fantastic as KO. KO could have easily been a doofus, but the way he's written and performed, he's more interesting. He's inexperienced and eager, but he's also competent and smart, and you get to see him learn and grow from the tribulations faced in the movie.
Learning, kid.
Beltran was so excited to be working with R.G. Armstrong and L.Q. Jones because he had grown up watching those guys, so he said he used his own eagerness and inexperience in his performance. I always thought Beltran should have had more of a leading man career. He's handsome, he's charismatic, he's got great comedic flair, and he's also great at doing action and drama, so what the hell, Hollywood?
I'm from Hollywood. I have the brains.
And what else can I say about Barbara Carrera? She's not only strikingly beautiful, she has a gutsiness and inner strength that really shines through. Born in Nicaragua, she started out as a model and transitioned to acting. She's great as the love interest here, but she really has a knack for playing evil, scheming women. This was around the same time she was co-starring as Fatima Blush in Never Say Never Again and the sinister doctor in I, the Jury. The film is also more lighthearted than you'd expect given its subject matter. I think as downbeat as most 70s cinema was, in the 80s, American cinema goers wanted something a little more optimistic. The action and gunfire are plentiful, but it's never brutal or mean-spirited. Lone Wolf McQuade could have easily been an R-rated movie, but Chuck fought to get the film a PG rating.
I kept thinking, just time and time again, that the people who would just get such a big kick out of the film would be your young people, your preteens and your early teens. Yet, because it's rated R, you've got to be 17 or older.
Oh, so maybe we're getting a PG out of it.
Are you?
Yes, I'm meeting with the appeal board next week, and because everyone told me since I've been on tour, all the critics and everyone was saying, you know, you're ridiculous to let it be an R. And I said, well, you know, my movies do very well as an R, so I've never really. I appealed my first 2 films, and I got a PG out of it, and so then I just said, well, it's just so much work to go down there and debate it. But then the guy brought up a point. One of the critics in New York brought up a point. He says, well, it's true in New York, Chicago, Detroit, you don't have to worry about it. The kids are going to get in to see the movie. But you get into the South, an R is like an X there. And so the thing is, the kids are not going to be able to get in to see your movie. They're going to have to drag their parents along. And then if they want to see it again, of course, they're not going to be able to get their parents to come the second time. So you're really depriving these kids in that particular area of the country. And I never thought of that before, because I've never considered any of my films R-rated movies, except Silent Rage, that was an R. But all my others have been fun. See, there's a difference between violence and action, Bobby, and it's how it's done. There's no blood in this movie, and it's a very pro-social type of action, not anti-social, not the vigilante going against the law, the anarchy, you know, death wish vigilante type movies. I don't do those. This is a guy who has to deal with situations that he has to handle as a law enforcement officer, which deals with action. But no bloodletting. There's no bloodletting in this movie.
The mystique of the J.J. McQuade character in The Texas Ranger is part of the appeal of the film. J.J. McQuade is a modern cowboy, the honorable lone wolf, an almost mythical figure standing up for his principles against the bad guys. It's the kind of part that would have been played by Clint Eastwood a decade earlier. I think in the 70s and the 80s, there was a romanticization of the cowboy loner, a yearning for that kind of hero that they felt may have been lost in an increasingly comfortable but increasingly controlled and increasingly neurotic industrial to post-industrial society. JJ is a man of strong principles. He upholds the law while remaining outside the bureaucratic system that has engulfed the law. He's a protector of society, but still apart from it. His pet wolf and rustic cabins are symbols of his status as a loner, his wildness. But his wildness is not something to be tamed. It's a sign that he's self-reliant, and he hasn't been tainted by the corruption of modern society. J.J. McQuade and L.Q. Jones's Dakota are contrasted with their captain, played by R.G. Armstrong. In one of the earliest scenes in the film, Dakota doesn't take the award he's given seriously. He'd rather be out doing his job.
Good speech, Dakota.
The hell with it. Did you get him?
You bet.
Oh, I'm sorry I tied up with this hand job session. I would love to have helped.
I could have used you there.
Dakota?
Yeah.
Can't say as I'm going to miss you.
Thank you very much, Captain. And thank you for the watch.
And you, McQuade.
Drink, Captain?
My office in 10 minutes.
J.J. McQuade is a man who lives for nothing but his mission. He's an ethical man, but he can also be too blunt, and he can be disagreeable with men he believes to be fools. His heavy beer drinking and messiness aren't signs of a lack of character. It's just that his entire focus is on the job.
What the hell are you doing?
Oh, hi. I just thought I'd clean up a bit.
Lady, if I want a maid, I'll hire one.
Chip, you're a hopeless slob. Let me have my cord.
What's this?
Vitamins.
Where's my beer?
In the garbage.
Where McQuade is concerned about justice, the captain, on the other hand, is preoccupied more with political maneuvering and being an enforcer of arbitrary rules.
You think you're pretty damn good, don't you, McQuade? Well, in case you didn't know it, there's a lot more to being a Texas Ranger than making bus. You gotta look good doing it. Style. The best always have style.
J.J. McQuade and his fellow cowboy loners care more about what's right and wrong, but they're surrounded by people who care more about the process of the system, more concerned with professional politics than morality, and more concerned with adhering to bureaucratic rules than justice.
In terms of unassisted felony arrests, I admit, your record is unrivaled, but my kind of ranger is a model citizen, pillar in the community. He goes to church. He lives clean, and he's got a loving wife and kids. Read it. It's an editorial by the senator who happens to approve our annual budget. I quote, Ranger J.J. McQuade is a walking symbol of the brutal, uncooperative, obsolete, and discriminatory nature of the Rangers today. Unquote. Well, your lone wolf attitude is going to change. You're going to start cooperating with the state and federal agencies. Understand?
By the early 80s in America, drug dealing had shifted from being an individual or a network of dealers to being well-organized, hierarchical cartels who operated with extreme violence. It went from something that operated in the shadows to something perceived as a national security threat. Violent crime rates surged in major urban centers, and some Americans feared that the government corruption was allowing these cartels to operate with impunity. Movies like Lone Wolf McQuade tapped into these anxieties, offering them an entertaining catharsis. American resentment towards bureaucracy, both government and corporate, had been fermenting since the late 60s, but came to a head in the early 80s. Government bureaucracy was equated with senseless rules that stifled economic ingenuity and independence and made life needlessly harder for the average person. Federal agents in these movies generally end up mucking things up by getting in the way, or they're more concerned with aggrandizing themselves versus protecting the public. This is also true in Lone Wolf McQuade, with the exception of Leon Isaac Kennedy's character, an honest man who joins JJ in battle.
Pretty quiet for a bit.
Oh, I make it my business. Looks like somebody doesn't like you, McQuade.
I make a few enemies here and there.
Yeah? So do I.
Corporate bureaucracy was also seen as stifling innovation, motivated by greed and the domain of petty pencil pushers who were more concerned with enforcing arbitrary rules and busy work. In Lone Wolf McQuade, the two lords of the drug cartel are none other than a pair of preppy douchebag yuppies who run the cartel like a cutthroat multinational conglomerate.
My arsenal! My investments! What have you done?
Audiences responded to characters like J.J. McQuade, the noble anti-establishment hero, an honorable man who would cut through all the bullshit and make things right. And he does one of the manliest things I've ever seen committed to celluloid.
Freeze, assholes! You son of a bitch!
There's a certain type, though, that really despises all the things that Chuck Norris stands for in the movies. Individualism, autonomy, stoicism, old-school masculinity. It's a type whose natural habitat is the internet, where they lather in their own pedantic priggishness, growing more and more bloated each day with their own smugness. Those people are called wussies. There's only one solution for wussies.
Welcome to my company of eunuchs.
Some folks, me included, are surprised that after Lone Wolf McQuade that Steve Carver didn't get at least a shot at being an A-list director. Carver attributed this to an incident that happened when directing Angel City, a CBS TV movie that aired in 1980. When leading man Ralph Waite showed up drunk on the set, Carver told the producers to fire the actor or Carver would leave. When the producers refused to remove Waite, Carver made good on his word and quit, and was subsequently blackballed. From reading and listening to interviews with Carver, I get the sense he did not suffer fools and probably hated playing the Hollywood game.
You can't sit with us!
Yeah, it's about the same mentality. Carver returned to one of his first loves, photography. He called on his character actor buddies to pose for a book of stylized Old West portraits called Western Portraits of Great Character Actors, the unsung heroes and villains of the silver screen. Get your copy today. In light of the success of Lone Wolf McQuade, as well as Silent Rage and Forced Vengeance the previous year, Cannon Films signed Chuck Norris to a 6-picture deal where he was one of their prominent stars in the 80s. I gotta end this show on kind of a sad note. Steve Carver and Chuck Norris unfortunately never worked together again. MGM and CBS were initially going to do a Lone Wolf McQuade television show. Carver and Joran Bonamy were involved in the beginning, with Carver slated to direct some episodes. Carver's cagey about the details, but from what I gather, they weren't able to secure the rights to the character from Orion, so the show became Walker, Texas Ranger. Carver and Bonamy then sued the production company for $500 million. The case went to the Supreme Court, but was ultimately dismissed, but needless to say, Chuck and Carver parted ways. Join me next time for the show a lot of you have been waiting for. It's time for me to break the catsuit back out and to return to the world of square jaws and bodacious bosoms. I'm talking about Russ Meyer's most famous film, filmed in glorious black and blue, where the sweetest kittens have the sharpest claws. Faster Pussycat, kill, kill. But until then, stay sick.